The house had never felt so empty. Luke had been gone for 4 years, but the silence still pressed against the walls, wrapping itself around me like an unwelcome shadow. Grief lingered in the air, woven into the fabric of every room. It had taken me months just to move his coat from the hallway, and even longer to stop expecting the sound of his footsteps on the stairs. But the worst part wasn't the loneliness. It was the feeling that time was pulling me forward against my will, forcing me to step into a version of my life where he no longer existed. And my body, it was betraying me too. The dull ache in my lower abdomen had become a constant companion, sharp at times, a whisper at others, but always there. I had ignored it for months, assuming it was stress or age creeping up on me. But last week, the pain had twisted inside me so violently that I doubled over in the kitchen, gripping the counter until the wave passed. That was when I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. The idea of seeing a doctor filled me with dread. It wasn't just the clinical nature of it. It was the fact that it meant acknowledging something was wrong. That my body was changing in ways I didn't understand. And so, after much hesitation, I called Adam. My son, my boy, though he was hardly a boy anymore. At 30, Adam had built a name for himself as a respected gynecologist, a fact that filled me with pride but also created an unexpected dilemma. The idea of discussing something so personal with him felt unnatural, yet at the same time, there was no one I trusted more. When I called, I kept my voice light, casual. Adam, sweetheart, I think I need to see a doctor. He had immediately gone into professional mode. What's wrong, Mom? What are your symptoms? I hesitated, feeling ridiculous for being so embarrassed. It's just some discomfort. Lower abdomen. Probably nothing. His voice softened. Come see me at the clinic. Tonight. After hours, so we don't have to go through the front desk. I exhaled, relief and apprehension mingling in my chest. Thank you, sweetheart. And so, here I was. The clinic was dimly lit when I arrived, the usual bustle of nurses and patients replaced by a peaceful stillness. Adam greeted me at the door, his white coat making him look older, more serious. It was always strange seeing him in his element, so confident and in control. You okay? He asked, placing a hand on my shoulder as he led me inside. I nodded, forcing a smile. Just not used to being the patient. He chuckled. You'll be fine. Let's get you checked out. The examination room was sterile and impersonal, but Adam's presence made it feel less intimidating. As he guided me through the process, his voice remained steady, reassuring. He explained everything, just as he would with any other patient, though I caught glimpses of something gentler in his eyes. After the ultrasound, he leaned back in his chair and studied the screen with a thoughtful expression. It's nothing serious, Mom. There's a small mass, but it's benign. No need to worry. Relief flooded me, but confusion followed close behind. Then why the pain? Adam hesitated for a moment before answering. It's a combination of things. Hormonal changes, stress, and he glanced at me, gauging my reaction. The body adapts to loss in ways we don't always realize. He frowned. What do you mean? He sighed, choosing his words carefully. Sometimes when people lose a partner, their bodies respond to the absence. It's not just emotional, it's physical. The lack of intimacy, of connection, can manifest in ways we don't expect. I stared at him, his words settling into the quiet space between us. I hadn't thought about it like that before. Had I really been so disconnected from my own body that I hadn't realized what it was trying to tell me? I let out a small, humorless laugh. So, you're saying my body is grieving too? In a way, yes, Adam said gently. I looked away, embarrassed by the vulnerability creeping up on me. I don't even know how to fix that. Adam reached for my hand, his touch grounding me. You don't have to fix anything, Mom. You just have to listen to yourself. His words settled into my bones, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something shift inside me. A recognition, an acknowledgement of all the ways I had been holding myself together while quietly falling apart. Adam squeezed my hand once before letting go. You'll be okay. Just Don't ignore what you need. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Thank you, sweetheart. As I left the clinic that night, stepping into the cool night air, I realized that Adam had given me more than just a diagnosis. He had given me permission to feel, to heal, to stop pretending that I was okay when I wasn't. And for the first time in years, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I could move forward. Even if I wasn't sure how. But Adam knew. He came to see me almost every night. The warmth of Adam's hands lingered long after he had finished the massage. I lay there for a moment, sinking into the quiet hum of my own breathing, my body finally at ease after weeks of pain and tension. It had been so long since I'd felt this kind of release, not just from the physical discomfort, but from the loneliness that had been weighing on me for months. When I finally opened my eyes, Adam was watching me. Not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but with an expression I couldn't quite place, somewhere between concern and something deeper, something neither of us dared name. That should help for now, he said, his voice softer than usual. But you'll need more sessions to really get back to normal. I nodded, suddenly aware of the way my skin tingled where his hands had been. I already feel better, I admitted. Thank you, Adam. I mean it. He smiled, and for a moment we were just two people sharing a quiet understanding. But then the silence stretched too long, and something shifted between us. I could feel it in the space that wasn't quite enough, in the air that suddenly felt too thick. Adam cleared his throat, running a hand through his dark hair. I should probably get going. I don't want to keep you up too late. He stood, and I watched as he reached for his jacket, the usual ease in his movements now slightly restrained, as if he too was fighting against something neither of us could quite name. You don't have to rush, I said before I could stop myself. Stay a little longer. If you want. His hand froze on his jacket, and for the briefest moment I thought he might say no. That he would step back, create the necessary distance, remind himself that we were standing on fragile ground. But instead, he exhaled and let go of the jacket. All right, he said, his voice low. Just for a little while. I stood, wrapping my arms around myself as if that would somehow contain the sudden swirl of emotions pressing against my ribs. Adam noticed, his brows furrowing slightly. You okay? I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I was lying or not. I hesitated, searching for the right words. I think I forgot what it feels like to be taken care of. To have someone notice when I'm not okay. His expression softened. Sandra. I'm not saying this to make things complicated, I interrupted, shaking my head. Tonight, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. And I don't know if that's a bad thing. Adam was quiet for a moment, his gaze never leaving mine. Then, as if making some kind of decision within himself, he sat back down on the couch beside me, a careful distance between us. You're not alone, he said finally. And I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The words felt heavier than they should, weighted with something we weren't ready to acknowledge. We sat there in silence for a while, the quiet settling between us like an unspoken agreement. Adam leaned back against the couch, his eyes flicking toward the ceiling as if searching for something in the cracks of the plaster. You know, he murmured, I used to think life was supposed to get easier as we got older. That we'd figure things out and stop making mistakes. I huffed out a laugh. That was a lie we were all told. He smirked, but there was something sad in it. I think I'm realizing that now. I turned to him, studying the lines of his face, the slight crease between his brows. Are you okay? I asked, mirroring the same question he had asked me minutes ago. He hesitated, then let out a breath. I don't know. I guess I've been thinking a lot lately. About choices. About where I am in life. There was something in his voice, something unsaid, and I knew better than to push. Instead, I reached for his hand, a small gesture, but one that felt monumental in the quiet of the room. You don't have to figure it all out tonight, I told him. His fingers tightened around mine, just for a second before he released me. Neither do you. We sat like that for what felt like forever, a delicate balance of words unspoken and thoughts too tangled to say out loud. Eventually, Adam stood, slower this time, as if reluctant to break the moment. "I really should go now," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I nodded, standing as well, walking him to the door. He hesitated again, turning back to me just as he reached for the handle. "Sandra." His voice was almost a whisper. "Yeah." His gaze searched mine, as if looking for permission to say something neither of us was sure we should say. But in the end, he simply exhaled, a small shake of his head following. "Take care of yourself, all right?" Something about those words sent an ache through my chest. But I nodded. "You too." And then he was gone. I stood in the doorway for a long time after he left, staring into the empty hallway as if expecting him to turn back. But he didn't. I closed the door, leaning against it as the weight of the night settled around me. The warmth of his hands was gone now, but the memory of it remained, lingering in the spaces where our boundaries had blurred. And as I climbed into bed, my body still loose from his touch, I couldn't help but wonder if tonight had been the start of something, or the beginning of the end. I wasn't sure when Adam stopped coming over just to help me and started coming over because he wanted to. Maybe he didn't even realize it himself. The excuses were there. My condition, my recovery. But we both knew that had stopped being the real reason. Still, we never said it out loud. It was easier to pretend. At first, he kept his visits brief. An hour here, an hour there, always under the pretense of checking on me. But then an hour stretched to two. Two became an evening. And before either of us could acknowledge what was happening, Adam was staying longer than he should. "You're feeling better," he said one evening, his hands pressing firmly along my shoulders. "But we should keep doing this for a while." I hummed in response, my body melting under his touch. "Is that what you tell your wife?" His hands hesitated for just a fraction of a second before he recovered. "She doesn't ask too many questions." A part of me wanted to ask more, to push, but I didn't. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Instead, I let my head fall forward, my breathing deep as he worked through the tension in my back. The room was warm, the air thick with something neither of us had named but both of us felt. I didn't realize when his hands started to change, when the touch that had once been clinical became something else. His fingers no longer moved with strict precision. They lingered, traced, explored in ways that sent something electric down my spine. "Adam," I murmured, but I wasn't stopping him. I wasn't even sure what I was saying. His hand slid down the curve of my back, slower this time, more deliberate. His voice was low, like he wasn't entirely there, like he had been caught up in something he wasn't ready to admit. I turned my head slightly, catching his expression. His jaw was tight, his brow furrowed, his lips slightly parted. His eyes met mine, and something flickered. Hesitation, curiosity, need. I started to say something, but I didn't know what. He let out a breath, stepping back suddenly. "We should stop for tonight." I should have agreed. I should have nodded, smiled, let him go. But instead I said, "Stay." He hesitated, his fingers flexing at his sides. "Sandra." Just for a little while. The moment hung between us, suspended in something fragile. Then, without another word, he sat down beside me. We ended up in my room, drinking wine, sitting too close on my bed. The conversation started light, easy, but it didn't stay that way. The longer we talked, the more we let our guards slip. "You know," he said, swirling the wine in his glass, "I don't know why I keep coming back." I looked at him over the rim of my glass. "Liar." His lips twitched. "Maybe." Silence stretched between us, thick and charged. The wine had loosened us both, but it wasn't the alcohol that made me bold. It was him. "You don't feel guilty?" I asked softly. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. "Should I?" I didn't answer, and neither did he. At some point the silence became too much. I wasn't sure who moved first. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was him. But suddenly we were closer. His hand brushed mine, a test, a question. I didn't pull away. Then his fingers were on my cheek, his thumb tracing my skin as if memorizing the feel of me. "This is wrong," he murmured, his breath warm against my lips. Exhaled. "I know." Neither of us stopped. His lips touched mine, hesitant at first, like he was still giving himself a chance to back away. But when I leaned into him, when my fingers found his jaw and held him there, the hesitation broke. The kiss deepened. His hand slid into my hair, gripping just enough to make my breath catch. My fingers clutched at his shirt, holding on to something I knew we were about to lose control of. And yet we didn't stop. We stayed there for what felt like forever, trapped in the space between mistake and inevitability, between resistance and surrender. He pulled away first, his forehead pressing against mine, his breathing unsteady. "We should stop." "We won't." A small, rueful laugh escaped him. "No," I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of what we had just done settle between us. The choice had already been made. The real question was, how much further were we willing to go? Adam began living in two different worlds. One where he was the man he had always been, the devoted husband, the caring father, the respected doctor. In that world, he sat across from his wife at dinner, listening as she spoke about her day, nodding in all the right places, pretending that everything was as it had always been. And then there was the other world, the one where he knocked on Sandra's door late at night with no excuse, where he stayed longer than he should, where his hands knew the shape of her body better than they knew the pages of his medical books. He told himself he could keep them separate. He was wrong. "Where were you?" His wife's voice cut through the quiet of their bedroom as he stood by the closet, unbuttoning his shirt. Adam hesitated for half a second, just long enough for her to notice. "I told you," he said carefully. "Sandra's recovery isn't where it should be. She still needs my help." She scoffed from where she sat on the edge of their bed, arms folded tightly across her chest. "And that help requires you to be out until midnight. Every other night." His hands froze for the briefest moment before he forced himself to keep undressing. "It's not every other night." She stood, crossing the room in slow, deliberate steps. "Adam." Her voice was lower now, calmer, which only made it more dangerous. "Are you having an affair?" His stomach twisted. His mind ran through 100 possible responses, but none of them would matter. No matter what he said, she already knew. Maybe she hadn't figured out who it was, but she could feel it, sense it in the way he had become distant, in the way he avoided her touch, in the way his lies had become second nature. He turned to face her, keeping his expression neutral. "Why would you even ask me that?" She searched his face, looking for something, anything. Maybe she was hoping he would deny it more passionately, that he would fight for their marriage the way he used to. But he didn't. He just stood there. Because deep down he knew. He wasn't the same man she had married. "I don't know who she is," she said finally, her voice raw, "but I know she exists." Adam exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "I love you," he said, and in a way it was true. He did love her. He loved their life, their history, their family. But he had never burned for her the way he burned for Sandra. His wife let out a soft, bitter laugh. "You love me, but you don't want me." She wasn't asking a question. She was stating a fact. And Adam had no idea how to refute it. Sandra met him at the door before he could even knock. She pulled him inside, closed the door, and pressed her lips to his before either of them could say anything. It had been this way for weeks now. No small talk, no hesitation, just the need that swallowed them whole the second they were in the same room. But tonight was different. There was something heavier in the way he kissed her, something desperate in the way he held on to her. When they finally broke apart, Sandra studied him carefully. "What happened?" Adam swallowed hard, his hands still resting on her waist. "She knows." Sandra's breath hitched. "She knows it's me." "No," he admitted. "But she knows there's someone." Sandra pulled back slightly, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. "And what are you going to do?" Adam had been asking himself that question for weeks. He had told himself he could keep lying. that he could keep walking between these two lives without one collapsing into the other. But he couldn't. His wife deserved more than this. And so did Sandra. I don't know, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Sandra sighed, stepping away from him. That's not good enough, Adam. His chest tightened. What do you want me to say? She turned to face him fully, her arms wrapping around herself. I want you to tell me where this is going. Because I can't keep doing this if it's just stolen moments in the dark. Adam closed his eyes for a second, inhaling deeply. This wasn't fair to her, to his wife, to anyone. I don't want to lose you, he admitted, his voice hoarse. But I don't know how to leave my life behind. Sandra nodded slowly, as if she had already known this was coming. That's what I thought. She didn't sound angry. She just sounded tired. Adam lay awake in bed that night, staring at the ceiling as his wife slept beside him. For the first time in weeks, he had no excuse to leave, no late-night call to Sandra, no whispered promises of just one more night. And yet sleep wouldn't come. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. Message. From Sandra. I can't do this anymore. His fingers hovered over the screen, but he didn't reply. Because what could he say? Sandra had been right. This had only ever been borrowed time. And now time had run out.